Julia Ward Howe wrote in 1870 as a declaration trying to begin a day for mothers together as a force of peace in the world. Julia Ward Howe was a ardent feminist, pacifist, abolitionist, peace worker, and she wrote her declaration as a reaction against the carnage of the Civil War and the Franco-Prussian War. And powerful lines there. You know, she said, "Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have taught them of charity, mercy, and patience." So it was a powerful cry for peace. And Julia Ward Howe suggested that there be a mother's gathering for peace on the, I think it was the second Sunday of June, or the 2nd of June each year. But maybe the statement was a little radical for some of the folks. Maybe she said things a little too straightly.
Because Hallmark took it over.
but that wasn't till later, because Mother's Day wasn't really established until the early 20th century, when another woman by the name of Anna Jarvis, established a memorial to her mother, Anna Maria Jarvis, woman who in West Virginia had spent her life establishing Mother's Day work clubs. And through the latter part of the 19th century, Anna Maria Jarvis created these clubs in numerous towns in West Virginia. And what they focused on was at first working with single women who had tuberculosis and had children and helping them. And then they set up essentially nursing care for both Confederate and Union soldiers during the Civil War. They declared themselves to be neutral, and so they treated the wounds, fed, and clothed soldiers from both sides. And so then Anna Jarvis sets up this memorial to her mother in 1907. A couple years later, it gets declared as Mother's Day. And then a couple years later, Anna Jarvis gets royally ticked off. Because all that people are doing is sending their mother a card. And that's not what she meant. And so Anna Jarvis went on, essentially bankrupted herself, trying to reclaim Mother's Day for its original intent. At one point, Jarvis said, "A printed card means nothing, except that you are too lazy to write to the woman who has done more for you than anyone in the world. And candy, you take a box to Mother and then eat most of it yourself." A pretty sentiment. But in both of these women, there is, I think, a proclamation of hope. There is a step into the world that is trying to make a difference. In the genesis of Mother's Day, there is a proclamation of hope that is grounded in a deep perception of really what the human condition is. I mean, neither Jarvis nor Howe sugarcoated things, but rather they saw life with clarity, the violence of it, and also the possibilities. And out of that steely-eyed clarity, each chose to make a creative proclamation. Both Howe and Jarvis enacted Howard Zinn's sentiment that we read in our readings when he said, "The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory." And that's the process of living with hope, choosing hope. Don't know if anybody ever demonstrated this as dramatically as Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, psychologist, a German, lived through the Nazi concentration camps. And in that process, which he talks about in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he demonstrates the power of being able to maintain our choice of hope in the midst of circumstances that are devastating. Frankl related how in the midst of the depravity of concentration camp life, it was still important to look to see where the good and the beautiful could be identified. You know, this is a man who lost his wife, siblings, parents, lost them all in the Holocaust, and was still in the midst of it all able to maintain a capacity for hope. See, while I acknowledge that it's often easier said than done, but choosing hopeful approaches to life is a way of leveraging our life energy in the direction of our dreams, of our aspirations, of what is highest and best in life. I suggest to you that our brains are hardwired to work best when they are free from negativity and despondency. Hope feeds the brain. It empowers us to work creatively. Creativity comes easiest and most spontaneous when we live in a hopeful space, in a space of possibility. See, we can see from figures like Jesus and Dorothy Day and Buddha and Mother Teresa and countless others that when we live in a hopeful space, that space is contagious to those around us. It's also contagious to those around us when we live in a hopeless space. And so it's important to choose. You know, when I read the story of the feeding of the 5,000, I don't read this as some magic story where Jesus takes 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and says some incantation over them and magically creates enough to feed everybody. We aren't talking about magic here. But rather, what I see here is Jesus transforming this crowd through his willingness to be a hopeful example. He said, "What do we have?" The disciples said, "Well, we've got 5 loaves and two fish." And he said, "Okay, give it to them." By being willing to share all that he had with the crowd, what he was doing is he was setting a model for a people who were used to being self-centered and just taking care of themselves. And when they saw this selfless giving of Jesus, what they did is they pulled out the food that they had brought along, which was meant for themselves, and put it into the common pot. The wasn't one of manufacturing food out of thin air. The miracle was of feeding people through the creation of community. Just as much a miracle. It's a creation of hope. So what does it take to live with hope? I would suggest that the bottom line has to do with answering Albert Einstein's question about whether or not we live in a friendly universe. And to answer that question is ultimately about what we choose to focus on and look at in our living. Note that Viktor Frankl lived in the midst of some of the most horrendous conditions imaginable. And yet his answer to that question of whether or not the universe is friendly, his answer was yes. At one point he was freezing and starving, being marched on this forced march. And he noted that if he kept the image of his wife and his love for her foremost in his thoughts, that empowered him to move forward, to get through the misery. At another time in the concentration camp, he found a single blade of grass growing up by one of the buildings, in the midst of all of this desolation. And for him, that was a sign of hope. It was a sign of life. And so he chose to look, in the midst of everything else, at the single blade of grass. So it has to do with choosing our focus. Most of us think that it's just what happens. We go through life and usually we're like billiard balls, just bouncing off of whatever comes to us. We don't see that we have choice about how we perceive these things. But we can train ourselves to be people of hope. I mean, just taking a few minutes a day, focusing on what is good in our lives, on what has been good and beautiful during the day, on focusing on our hopes, on our aspirations for our lives. This can make all the difference in the world, in the quality of our living, which then affects our relationships. It's like what we're doing is we're polishing the lens of our perception so that we can see things more clearly. If we can identify each day a way that we've used our talents and gifts to benefit the world or ourselves, it'll build that muscle in our lives so we do it more naturally and more often. If we can identify one way in which the universe or God has been friendly to us during the day, it will again build that certainty that we are a part of something much larger than ourselves, and that something is friendly. It'll give us the security that all of life isn't just up to us, but we're part of a larger whole. See, if we train ourselves to look for the good things, for the gratitudes, for the beautiful, then what happens is our lives become lighter, because that's what we're living. It's a choice, Do we look at the crud or do we look at the good? Do we look at the manure or do we look at the garden that grows out of Besides developing a hopeful lens through which we experience and perceive life, we can also develop our own hopes and dreams. And this is something that all of us have, no matter what our age or situation. Unfortunately, for most of us, when we identify dreams and aspirations, we identify them, we may even write them down, and then we set them on a table and go about our lives, and we don't keep them in the front of us. And, we want these things to become reality. One of the things we need to do is to keep them in the front of us. I'm ADD. I focus here, and I'm like this, and then I'm like this, and I get distracted really easy. So I need external helps, and so I can focus on that which is good and beautiful. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll take and put something up on the bathroom mirror so that I see it every morning. And it's just a reminder of what it is that I'm about in my life. It's an external kind of structure to help me. Other people do collages. I've heard of people who've done screensavers to help remind them of what they're about, what their dreams and aspirations are. Sometimes subscribing to a blog that is inspiring. Any way that you can keep that dream in front of you will help you. But even more important than all of this is if we're to maintain hope. I think the bottom line is recognizing that we aren't just an isolated phenomenon in the universe. When Jesus fed his followers on the hillside, what he did was he created a community of hope. And I'll bet that you can each identify people in your own lives who would be supportive of your outrageous hopes and dreams, of the things that you would like to do and be in your life. Jay Perry, one of the master coaches who was at this conference that I was at this past week, calls these people hope holders. Now, maybe we can each identify hope holders in our own lives. Hope holders are people who will be your hope community. They'll be there through thick and thin, supporting you. It's just a matter of asking them, sharing with these people what it is that you're about. Kerry Patterson, in his book, Change Anything, asserts that having people like this is key to any kind of goal achievement or breaking of bad habits. Patterson essentially says willpower is a myth. We don't do things by willpower. We do things in the midst of community. So we create a community of hope. We identify hope holders and invite them to participate in our lives. Patterson distinguishes between what he calls enablers. These are people who will give us food when we're trying to diet. You know those folks? You know those folks who will support us in being as stuck as they are? There are the enablers, and then there are the true friends who can see our dreams and who can support us in achieving them. And so being part of a hope community is truly important. in living with hope. So one of the invitations that we all hold is the invitation not only to lead hope-filled lives for ourselves, but it's also to recognize that we are vital to those people around us as hope holders. Actually, it's important to then go the step beyond being the hope holder, and to also be the hope generators. And those are the people who, in the midst of the circumstances of life, during the difficult parts, are willing to say the hopeful and generative word. Jesus, Harriet Tubman, Buddha, Gandhi, Juliet Ward Howe, Desmond Tutu, Anna and Ann Jarvis, all examples of people who were hope generators. And that's the opportunity for all of us, individually and community. So, what are your hopes? What do you choose? How will you hold hope for others? How will you be a hope generator? What are our hopes? How will we hold hope for our community? And how will we generate hope for the broader world? Peace and blessing.